I felt an element of uncertainty around this entire project, creating a YouTube channel about my relationship with Lazaris, emphasizing a number of the critical elements, casting doubt on Lazaris, etc. It's not at all clear, or has not been clear to me throughout, that this is definitely the right thing to do. But it did seem more likely that talking about things rather than suppressing or not talking about them would at the very least, lead to something coming to light, being resolved. What I find somewhat surprising, delightful, and fascinating is the improved relationship that I have with Lazaris and the Lazaris protocols or techniques as a result of making relatively critical videos about them. This week I've made a number of videos, questioning, doubting, critiquing elements of the Lazaris material. And last night when I did the meditation on ending pain, as part of a protocol I've been doing of falling asleep to one Lazaris meditation a night, to help partly with insomnia, but also to help with creating a positive focus, is the meditation has never been so interesting, has never been so magical, has never been so clear. Now, admittedly, some of this has to do with microdosing. There's a really beautiful fusion or synergy between microdosing psilocybin-containing mushrooms and Lazaris meditations, and so that definitely deserves credit. Some of it, I think, with that, one of the nice things about psychoactive mushrooms and similar compounds is it's not so much that it changes the thought process as much as I don't believe it as much, right? And so, I've enjoyed making some of the critical videos about, my experiences with Lazaris this week, in part because I don't believe what I'm saying, or that what I'm saying is all that important. Words compartmentalize reality, and then you build thought architecture with those compartmentalized words into, different shapes, but, they're ultimately pretty illusionary. And, what's more fundamental, and certainly I think more significant and important, is, are you enjoying, are you present, are you aware during all that architecture building, right? Because those structures come and go. There have been 10,000 cultures in human history. Each has had their own language. And the way you chop up reality with words determines the ways that you can reassemble it, right? If you chop up the word to focus on objects rather than space, then you say that's a finger. But if you chop up the world to focus on space rather than objects, you say that those are two things that hold the space for this shape here, right? That this is what really matters. And your words reveal, the bias or the emphasis. And of course, they all dissolve, right? 95% of all human cultures or cults have gone extinct, meaning nobody speaks their language, right? And so, when will English join the club of the 95% of extinct, defunct ways of, reassembling reality in different ways? So it's, on some level, it's just hard to take all that seriously. And I think that's, that's a 30% component to the lighter energy and the stronger, visualization and meditation, which is wonderful. However, I think another aspect is there's some part of me that thinks somehow that something terrible will happen and it's bad, to be critical of one's role models or anything like that, in this case, criticizing Lazaris. And so going through that fear, right, and getting to the other side, right, there's got to be projections, I think, largely parental projections, in all that fear. And so to just go through it is to, is to get to the other side of that. I don't ever feel Lazaris either criticizing me or being distant from me as a result of sharing what I find to be good and what I find to be absurd or unethical, about the material or concept synergy. I just don't get a sense that, Lazaris is in ego all worked up about it. And so that's actually, in a certain way, allowing me to experience Lazaris rather than the parental film between me and Lazaris, right? Because the expectation is there, I'll be punished, it's going to be terrible and all that. And of course, when all that's there is a nice smile, then my relationship with Lazaris, as opposed to the projected authority figure, is actually clearer, cleaner, more real. And there's also, I think, some of the thing of anything that you fear and suppress out of fear gets bigger, and thus the obscuring blocks to have a real relationship get bigger. I've noticed that with, a variety of different people, that when somebody looks at me in fear and oh, I'm going to get in trouble if I do this, it, first of all, it can form a loop because it's always irritating to I get irritated when somebody is off in a fantasy about me rather than seeing me, right? So when someone's worried that, they're going to get in trouble for something that I don't care about at all, or that I don't have any impulse to, quote, get them in trouble for, I instead just notice that they don't see me. And since that's a bigger issue for me, meaning I feel the loneliness of invisibility a lot of the time, since that's a bigger issue than whatever it is they were imagining that was a big issue, I may, feel the hurt, the pain, the frustration of that loneliness and be a bit impatient, which then somebody can use to reaffirm, see, they knew they were going to get in trouble about that, when I'm actually annoyed that they're not seeing me, right? But when people are stuck in their thing, that forms a loop, right? And so then you say, okay, forget it, off you go. I guess you can't see me. And then they're like, see, I knew I was going to be in trouble. It's terrible. And they've never seen me the whole time, but they've used the critical feedback loop, right, to reaffirm their bias, not to actually break through and see me. And so it makes sense that that same protocol of having a preconceived notion can get in the way of my relationship with Lazaris, and then can be confirmed, when it's a good thing I didn't say that, But if you let everything out, right, and then the air is just clearer, then it's like, no, Lazaris was never going to punish me or do this or that, And so I think there's a sense of humor on the other side of that, like, that's silly. And so I think maybe 10, 20% release in that area. Then there's also just the fact, I think Lazaris has talked about on the impact, clearing the windshield element of emotional impact. All the things that, I criticize Lazaris for, or complain, criticize concept synergy for, etc. Those all are impacts on my windshield, right? That's been confusing, hurtful, lonely, sad, angry, And by expressing them, right, they're kind of wiped off of my windshield. A certain amount of it gets released in the expression. And so I can see more clearly. And since, I think there is a strong foundation of, beauty, truth, and goodness in and around the Lazaris material, then, I think there is more to see. And as a little side note along those lines, I feel like it's good to say what I think, but the observer in me that's watching me say what I think or what I believe, does not have a strong conviction one way or another. It's like, well, that's an interesting thing to think, or that's an interesting thing to believe, or. But what the observer does notice and is much more interested in is resonance lifting and sinking. And some of the time that I'm talking, without necessarily knowing why, resonance is lifting up. Other times I seem to lose the thread and it just goes stale, right? There's a scent going along there and, energy is lifting up. Oh, that's it, And the observer says, well, regardless of whether it's true or not, it's great that the energy is rising. That's good. And so there have been several times that I've left, what you could easily describe as, as a diatribe or, long list of critical comments about Lazaris, and I've had higher energy afterwards. And that's of interest to the observer, because, who particularly suffering from chronic fatigue, that's something that I pay attention to because I need to follow the scent to a higher energy, which means going through, all the areas that I'm suppressing energy out of fear, out of terror, out of trauma, and not being able to cope with certain things if they come up. And so I'm trying to control all these various things, which is, of course, exhausting. But it's coming, from layers and layers of trauma and PTSD that have dangers in and of their own right, meaning I've noticed that even if I can look straight at something and say that is no threat, rationally, if my body believes that that thing has the ability to kill me because of a past memory, it becomes a very real threat. And so I have to rationally say, okay, it isn't a threat because of it, but it is a big threat because of the visceral way that I'm reacting to it and the fact that that reaction could hurt me a lot because I can't function while I'm in reaction. And I need to be able to function. If I can't function, the inability to function is going to hurt me a lot, right? And so it's tricky, right? You can't just say, plow through because it's an irrational fear. No, it is an irrational fear until you take into account the reaction to the irrational fear, which creates a legitimate threat, right? You can use an example of driving. That's one of the areas that comes up. It's like, well, it or they may not be a threat, but if I get into a traffic accident because I'm reacting as if it is a threat, then it is a threat, right? So it's kind of one of those catch-22s. And so, yeah, just looking at all of that and seeing what loosens some of those reactions up, and what doesn't. But it's a surprising thing for me to notice. Like, I had an amazing meditation tonight. I haven't fallen asleep yet, but I experienced the meditation I was much more, I don't know if it was open to it or I was just like, wow, that's really perceptive. I didn't notice Lazaris was cued into that or that, right? He's oh, interesting. That's really profound, right? I think it's healing ourself and our world with resonance is the meditation. So it was, and then looking at, so a tremendous amount of beneficial resonance shifts and, health. I'm looking at, health and well-being at these times. And so I find this great. It's a wonderful surprise. It's a wonderful mystery how all of this fits together.